and welcome to the final video about my 1830s Ariel inspired look. It's finally time for the visible part of this project, and that's the dress. And my light just died. This has been quite the journey spread over many months, and I can't believe we're finally towards the end. I am just gonna walk through the process of how I made it. It is one of my favorite historical projects, I think. It's just so crazy and fun, and I was really excited to just incorporate the Ariel inspired in the dress. I had the idea for it, and then it just kind of grew from there, and then once it was all done, it was like, yes, this is what I was picturing in my mind, and it worked. After creating a mock-up and making some adjustments of a pattern from Patterns of Fashion, I moved on to cutting it out of my fabrics. The interlining layer is going to be a glazed linen. It's very sturdy and crisp, and from my research was the common fabric to create structure in the bodice in the 1830s, especially in the sleeves. Once all the pieces were cut, it's on to cutting out the silk taffeta, which is the perfect seafoam aqua-y color. As it turns out, it perfectly matches the ocean color. You'll see that at the end. Something unique with this pattern, and those often found in the 1830s, is this bias cut of the front pieces with a center front seam. You might also notice that these bodice pieces are pretty short. That's because the waistline of this era is higher than your natural waist. I also cut out a bunch of bias strips, which we turned into piping and some binding. First off, the linen is basted to the silk pieces, and then it's time to assemble. So this dress will feature a lot of piping. My favorite, I love piping details. The first couple pieces will be placed on the side back seams, as was common for a lot of historical bodices. For the front, there are darts, which I've basted along, and then I cut out the middle section, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once those darts are sewn, that center front seam is sewn. But before attaching the back pieces to this with the side seams, I'm going to place my draped pleating pieces along this front because they're going to connect into that side seam. This draped aspect is something I'm basing on these drawings, but I'm also trying to bring in like a ruffle type texture that seashells have. So it took a while to figure out a good design for this draping, and so I just played around with it a lot. But I will add, I'm mainly focusing on how it will be placed at the bottom and at the side seam. The top I will arrange later, you'll see in a moment. Once I got that desired look, I could then baste it to the bottom and side seam, and then attach those back pieces. And now I can finish draping the top part of this draped look with my bodice on a dress form. Once the draping is finished at the top, I'm finishing off this wide neckline with piping, but not just one row, I'm gonna do double piping. But watch as I do it incorrectly. If this was to just lay like this, it's great, but these raw edges need to be turned inside towards the inside of the bodice to create a clean finished neckline. But that brings the double piping facing the inside of the bodice. So I had to take that second row off and attach it overlapping the other way. And now when you flip those raw edges over, the double piping is revealed on the correct side. To finish up the inside of this bodice, there's first a small piece of boning placed at the center front seam. This channel is sewn just with some linen tape and is sewn just at the seam allowances, and then a piece of synthetic whalebone is inserted. And now for all these raw seams, they get treated with catch stitches. I love a good catch stitch, keeping everything in place, just neat and tidy. This goes for the seams, darts, neckline, and also, after attaching piping, the waist. To finish up the back closure, a section of silk is attached to one side, and then linen tape is sewn to the seam allowances on each side, which will be then sewn down to contain those raw edges. And finally, a hook and thread bar closure is sewn in place. Oh, and I also realized a piece of boning in the hook edge will help keep this closure smooth against the back. And the bodice is not done. We can't forget the sleeves, especially in the 1830s. It's all about the poof, no skinny. I'm so sorry, I couldn't help it. But anyway, I decided on short poofed sleeves with a sheer long sleeve overlay. This is something you see in historical paintings, and I just thought it looked so good with like ocean-y, ocean mist type of inspiration. So first you start with a short sleeve, and they're lined with glazed linen that is basted together, and then the cuff edge is gathered up with stacked pleats, and then I attached a double row of piping. This time it's stacked like you would think it should be. And then after that, I attached a binding, which will create a little band once it's sewn. Now for the outer sleeve, it's made of a silk gauze, as it was called back in the day. Nowadays, it feels more like a silk organza with a light, crisp drape. I decided on hand sewing the seam to achieve a smaller, smoother, kind of hardly noticeable result. From here, this is attached to the short sleeve at the armhole, which is gigantic. The edges are basted together, and then the edge is pleated up, leaving a few inches smooth for the underarm part. For the pleats, I did a couple box pleats at the top and then moved off in each direction with stacked pleats. Once these pleats decreased the gigantic circumference to a reasonable armhole size, I attach some piping and make it double. And now it's finally time to attach them to the bodice. Now, because of the piping trick and needing to see that basting line that I sewed to the sleeve, I had to turn the sleeves inside out through the arm side, which is not an easy task with these huge sleeves. And then I got them sewn and then had to turn them right side out again. But it was worth it. The last task is finishing up the cuff of the sheer layer with a tiny rolled hem, and then create some thread bars, which will actually be used as loops to insert a lacing. So I first used some not quite matching silk ribbon for this that I had in stock, and then realized it did not work. So I eventually replaced it with some self-made matching lacing, but that proved to be just too thick and clumsy looking. So there's a matching silk ribbon in the mail, which will make these look delicate and just nice because they match. And now to make yards and yards of piping. This is all going to be for the skirt detail. I wanted to bring in some fun details which really brought to life the inspired by Ariel look. Ladies of the 1830s loved their skirt trim, so I jumped in and embraced that. All this piping is going to be arranged in a wave pattern along the skirt. Before we get ahead of ourselves, the skirt itself is just a few rectangles sewn together. Pretty basic. So for the trim, after finding a good design, I got a template printed up and then traced it all along the skirt about 1/3 the way up from the hem. Trims in these days were placed around this area, not closer to the hem like you start seeing in the 1860s. From here, I sewed and sewed and sewed some more, and then maneuvered the fabric this way and that way and did it again and again and again to attach the piping in the correct design. Not an easy nor fast task, but I also knew I didn't want to hand sew it all on, so I dealt with it. Finally, after getting all the way around, which so thankful that these skirts aren't as huge and full as the 1860s, it would have taken so much longer. But anyway, I could finally move on to the new task, which was trimming all the seam allowances down. From here, I printed out an elongated template of the same wave. So this is to cut out the silk gauze. This is actually silk gauze, the stuff from nowadays, the flowy, soft fabric. All these pieces are scraps from cutting out one of my Cinderella skirts. This was not the dress that is my current dress. This was one before that, where I used silk gauze as a substitute for the Umissima layer. Anyway, the template is elongated because I want to gather up the silk gauze a little bit to fill out the wave and create some poofiness. After patiently getting it all pinned in place, I could finally start sewing it in place, and I definitely was hand sewing it. There was no way I was going to do the same pattern with the machine again, and also I know I wouldn't be able to make it look as good. So with hand sewing, I was able to get hidden stitches and could smoothly gather the gauze around all the curves. Finally, with the trim attached, we can get to finishing up this project. Because of the bustle worn under the skirts, the back is slightly longer, So to allow for this, an adjustment is made at the waist, not the hem. So I cut my front panel slightly shorter and then did a gradual trim towards the back. Before doing anything else, I'm gonna make a pocket. This is a pretty basic design. First, a slit is cut on the side of the skirt, and then a rectangle cotton piece gets 2 rectangles of silk sewn to one side. When folded in half, you have a section which is lined with silk, and that will be the pocket opening. From here, this opening is sewn to the slit in the skirt. So it took me a minute to visualize which side is going where and how it all matches up, but as I always find, it's best to lay it in the way you know it's supposed to end up in, and then working backwards from there to the best way to find that proper next step, if that makes sense. So once both silk-lined sides of the pockets are sewn to the slits, the rest of the pocket sides are sewn together to create a pocket. Now for the hem, I'm stiffening it up with a section of thick cotton fabric. This piece is sewn to the bottom edge, and then the whole thing is turned up to create a giant hem. From here, it's hand sewn in place. And with it falling just at the wave, I was able to mostly hide the stitches, which sped up the process and also just made a nearly invisible hem from the right side. Now for the waist, it's going to be cartridge pleats. About 3 inches at the top is folded over, and then from there I divided the skirt up into even sections, just marking them with pins. This is so I can create an evenly pleated waist as I go along. So from here, I then marked a bunch of lines 3/8 inch away from each other across the whole waistline. I also marked 2 horizontal lines, which will be the lines for the stitches. Once it's all marked, it's now time to make all those pleats, sewing them in place. I am doing 2 rows of thread. Once I've sewn both threads in each sectioned out waist, I could then gather it up from here and make sure that the gathered section measures the correct distance to make up my waist at the end. And then I could continue on to the next section. Now to attach the skirt to the bodice, each individual pleat is sewn on. So with the piping being placed at the bottom edge of the bodice, it made the process a little bit slower than usual because I had to be careful to not grab the piping and sandwich it into the seam. But each time I grabbed a bit of the bodice just above the piping and then grabbed that one edge of the pleat, and on and on and on until it's done. Now, one of the last steps is to attach the top edge of the pocket to the waist area. This helps hold the weight of whatever is placed in the pocket and makes the pocket not droop or drop once you put something in it. Though I will add, I did not account for the folding over of the waist, so my pocket opening is now a bit smaller than I wanted, so just remember that when you're deciding your pocket slit size. And with that, this project is complete. But actually, wait, just a minute. There's also things called sleeve puffs in this era, which help keep the sleeves poofed out and large. So I did not film any of the process of making these. Wow, look at me go. But I will link a couple sources down below which show the process and is how I learned how to make them. But once they're made, these are placed inside the sleeve and tied in place. And now with that, it's finished. Let's go to the beach. I hope you enjoyed this whole series of making this historical look, and if you're planning a historical 1830s look yourself, I hope that it gave you a good understanding of what it will entail. And stay tuned for the getting ready video where I don all the different pieces that create this 1830s ensemble. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons, Instagram subscribers, and YouTube members for their continued support. And remember to go out there and learn, create, and inspire.